Hey, you, it is Nina here. You are officially listening to Triggered. Can we play with that wherever you get your podcasts? Y'all, this episode is, pun intended in this case, going to be very triggering for some people. So I'm going to give you a content warning up front. Of course, this is Triggered. Can we play with that? Yes, we want you to transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Today's hard conversation is going to revolve around facets of gun violence and weapons control. If that's not a space to explore on your journey today, it's okay if you don't listen to this episode. Give yourself that permission to not tag in on this episode, right? We'll catch you in the next one. That said, this is the third episode of the TRA series on transparency, responsibility, and accountability. So if you are trying to transform from a powered to an empowered space, and you're trying to figure out how do you make that transformational move, this is the third episode in the series. And in all of the show notes, that TRA one pager is there for you to explore whether you listen to the episode or not. But we are going to dive in this episode on accountability and what that really means for us to show up as empowered humans. So with that said, please grab a journal or a really good friend to dialogue with about what comes up for you in this episode. Y'all know that I am growth oriented. I want us to be able to, at the very least, acknowledge and have these conversations for and with ourselves, and then to be able to move beyond ourselves to others, and finally to be able to take what we've learned out into the world and to make real change. Okay. So grab those things. That is the invitation. We are going to start with maybe a few stories this go, some psychoeducational knowledge, some transformational invitations and tips, and of course, an adventure challenge for your upcoming week. Today, at the end of 1 to 2 p.m. from today, if you are listening to this on the day that this episode is aired, we have our Empowered Human Live community meeting. It's a free meeting where we get to talk about the empowered human world and lifestyle and showing up in that way as a part of the empowered human movement. Go to my Instagram at Drama Therapist Nina if you want to get in on that for the next month. If you missed it today, no harm, no foul. We will keep bringing these back because we need to have these conversations. So with that said, and without further ado, you know at this point, I am curious. Are you ready to play?
Welcome to Triggered. Can we play with that? You know that moment when your emotions ramp up in an instant, leaving you feeling helpless, frozen, or out of control? In that moment, you've been emotionally hijacked, the very definition of triggered. And I want to ask you, can we play with that? I'm Nina L. Garcia, drama therapist and empowerment coach of Houston Creative Arts Therapy. Join me as we discover ways to empower you and the people who mean the most to you to transform hard conversations into teachable moments. Triggered. Real playful, real respectful, real empowered.
Let's take a breath. Maybe do a little stretching in on this breath too, I guess. Okay. So here we go. We are transforming hard conversations into teachable moments. The last two episodes featured very popular stories. We had transparency, in which is, by the way, right, us acknowledging what is transparently present, which means all parties involved in a situation where there is a conflict or confrontation. Transparency is being able to acknowledge what is present and what you notice, and everyone would agree with the transparent issue, okay? That's really important because when we want to build bridges in the empowered human style, right, we're building that bridge, we've got to know that everybody's on the same page. So with transparency, we utilize the Harry and Meghan story. In the last episode, we explored responsibility. Responsibility, in a nutshell and as a reminder, is only the things that you as an individual can control. Your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, right? Your human experience. Nobody else is available to control those things for you. So we used the Will Smith and Chris Rock moment in reality, and we explored Will Smith's expression of taking responsibility for what he had done and then attempting to make that repair to the rupture, right? So that's transparency, responsibility. Today's episode, just like I mentioned, is going to really focus on accountability. Accountability is arguably the final step in this process of TRA. And what we're doing with accountability is you, my friend, are going to be inviting everyone involved in the situation, in the conflict, to hold themselves responsible for what is theirs. Their thoughts, their feelings, behaviors, right? That's what responsibility is in this context. Accountability is you asking everyone else to be responsible. This is so triggering for some people because really, when we're talking about accountability, I'm talking about confrontation. And I don't mean negative powered confrontation where we're trying to shut someone down, right? Rewind here for those of you who do not know the difference between powered and empowered, and in this case, powered and empowered confrontation. Get those journals out. We just reviewed transparency, responsibility, and accountability, which we're going to be exploring more. Accountability, in essence, equals confrontation. I am trying to confront you and invite you. I'm inviting you to hold yourself responsible for what you can. So when we think about powered confrontation, we're often talking about how many of us were raised. I am willing to minimize, misrepresent, or outright reject you if I disagree with the way that you are expressing yourself. In an empowered confrontation, what I'm saying is different. What I'm saying is, I see that you have a difference. I see that we have a difference here, but I want to build a bridge of understanding. I don't have to agree with what you believe, and you don't have to agree with what I believe, but I'm not going to minimize, misrepresent, or outright reject you. I'm just going to transparently tell you what I'm seeing. I'm going to be responsible for what I can, and I'm going to invite you to hold yourself responsible by me holding you accountable. Okay. So the topic for today that we're exploring is transparently, gun violence is a problem. Okay. If you were to take the one pager that is in the show notes and you were to fill out that T line for transparency, what's the problem we can all agree on? Gun violence is a problem. I'm going to get even more specific. In the US, if you are not familiar with the statistic, and of course, I want you to go look up everything that I'm talking about if that's what's helpful for you, right? I am not an all-knowing, all-seeing individual, and we're not going to be able to explore all facets of gun violence and weapons control. But at this point in America, weapons, guns, are the number one leading cause of death in children. And it breaks my heart to say that as a mother. So forgive me as I know you hear the break in my voice in this moment. But it wasn't until this year, 2023, I was at a family-friendly, public, out and about carnival with lots of children and lots of families. And from the moment I parked, I noticed I was hyper vigilant and I was anxious. And I thought, what is happening right now? I'm ready to have a good time. I'm laughing. We are having a good time. But why do I feel so hyper vigilant, so anxious? Because in the back of my head, not too far away, was mom, right? Me talking to myself. You have to stay vigilant because you don't know when somebody is going to try to take out our most vulnerable population. Okay. Because of whatever they're going through. So, with this in mind, somebody recently said to me, Nina, you really need to look at some of these more hot button issues. I want to hear you talk about it. I want to hear your stance. And so here it is, friends. We're talking about weapons control and gun violence in this episode. Let's get back to that tool. TRA, transparently, gun violence is a problem in America, period. Everybody would agree with this. If you don't agree with this, then you must agree that gun violence is okay in that you are fine with it. And this episode is not for you. Yes. In an empowered space, we want to be transparent. Gun violence is a problem. That's the transparent issue that we're looking at, period. So we move on to R, responsibility. Again, responsibility is only the thoughts, feelings, behaviors that we can control, but it is for every character involved in the situation. And so when we think about the characters involved and responsible in these situations of gun violence, it is the person who brought the weapon, right? They are responsible for that weapon. Their own mental health and wellness, they were not responsible for it. For whatever reason, we're going to keep going. Whoever provided them with that weapon, yes, whether it was a manufacturer, a seller, a friend, doesn't matter, responsible in some way, shape, or form, just so we're clear, right? Not necessarily for what happened, but for the passing of that weapon, just so we get really clear too, right? Who's just responsible for the weapon? That's what we're looking at here. Anyone who allowed that weapon into the country or to be sold in that way, shape, or form is then responsible, right? Because the problem of transparently gun violence is a problem, period. Responsibility, everyone who brought in the weapon that could in the future potentially create violence. Those are the parties who are responsible in this case. And so we keep going. A is the focus of this episode, accountability. Hear this next part and hear it well, folks. We are all subject to the systems that we live in. And there are many, many systems in which we live. So when we think about accountability, us holding all the characters in this situation involved, right? Us holding them accountable, we are asking each and every part of the many systems to be responsible for the passing of that weapon from the moment it enters our country. Responsible for the weapon, responsible for the manufacturing of the weapon, how it gets passed, how it gets sold, that it is in fact registered. These are things that are not required, right? As of at least my knowledge base in this. And here's another bit. I know that there is going to be somebody out there who's saying, you're not covering everything. You're right. Because in this case, I want us to think about how do we hold the people accountable in this situation? How do we invite everyone to be responsible and not from a powered way of weapons control, but an empowered way for weapons control? And yes, folks, I do believe that this can exist. You asked for my perspective on this, and hey there, folks, I am going to offer it to you. Here we go. Let's get into this. First things first, powered weapons control gives power to the people who have the most resources, okay? Powered weapons control only gives power to one party, usually, right? And here's what that looks like. This would be like the voters, right? Because these are the people in power, adults who can purchase weapons, anyone selling weapons, anyone transferring weapons in the US, right? All of these people benefit from having power with weapons control, which means the less control, the better, right? That is what would be most beneficial when we think about a powered weapons control. What is the problem with this? Powered weapons control means a whole host of anybody who's vulnerable or does not have that power is now privy to what happens when we are not responsible for those weapons. For any of the many, many reasons why people are not responsible with weapons, it is our most vulnerable populations who are going to suffer in a powered weapons control world. Just so we're clear, that's what we're exploring, okay? Mina, you ask me, does empowered weapons control even exist? I think we should get rid of all the weapons, right? Or you might be the other side. No, absolutely not. Don't have me do anything. We right to my weapons. Listen, I am not here to tell you one way or the other. I am here to offer you the difference between a powered weapons control world and an empowered weapons control world. Are you ready to hear what we think about with empowered weapons control? In an empowered weapons control world, everyone gets power when it comes to weapons control. So what this means is, yes, Yes, if you want a weapon responsibly, you may have that weapon. And all weapons must be registered so that, here's why, so that when someone is not responsible with their weapon, we can hold them accountable for that failure of responsibility or the need to then hold themselves responsible for the actions that have occurred with that weapon. That is an empowered weapons control world. It is possible. We can say that people can have weapons for whatever reason that they would want it. And also that we are going to expect you to be responsible with those weapons. And just like any vehicle with a registration, that we want to make sure that we can hold people responsible for what happens in those vehicles, we are going to hold people responsible for what happens with weapons. That's it. That is at its core the most simplified we can make it of the difference between a powered weapons control world and an empowered weapons control world. The problem that we're having right now is that it is very much powered. We can blame people who are unwell and just say, let's beef up school security, right? Which is not a solution. It is just more powered engagement with weapons control. Because instead of being preemptively empowering with giving everyone power when it comes to weapons, we are saying, let's go ahead and be prescriptive. It's not a matter of if it will happen again. Unfortunately, it is a matter of when it will happen again. And apparently, we better hope that the school security or the organization security or the security in the area is appropriate instead of going to the source of the issue and saying, you know what? Let's not be prescriptive. Let's be empowered and preemptive. Let's acknowledge the systems that we live in. Let's be transparent about the issues. Let's hold everyone responsible. And when they're not, we're going to hold them accountable because we are committing to be an empowered nation. Wouldn't that be something? Now, I know a lot of people will say, wow, what a fantasy, Nina, what a dream. And in some way, shapes, and forms, it is, because it's not our reality yet. I hope that you are taking notes as for TRA in this case and really thinking about whether you yourself would commit to a powered dynamic in this case or an empowered dynamic in this case. Is it better for you if one particular group in society has the power in this case, or do you think it would be more beneficial if everyone had power in this case? Some little nuggets of wisdom here. Definitely bring out those journals at this point because I'm going to rattle them off. Accountability is an empowered way of inviting everyone to hold themselves responsible in a situation. Powered and oppressive dynamics continue because we don't expect all parties involved in an oppressive situation to hold themselves responsible for what they can control. And yet, when we fail to hold others accountable, we invite a powered and oppressive dynamic to just keep on keeping on. So for all my empowered humans out there and people wondering if they want to move and transition and transform from a powered to an empowered space, if you don't want to be complicit, start figuring out how to be transparent about the issues, the core issues, not your feelings on the issues or what you think the world should be like, because I'm going to tell you to flag that should, right? But what is the transparent issue that everybody can see, period? The next step, be responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Can't nobody else do it but you, boo, period. And then that third part, You hold all parts of the system accountable for their responsibility when it comes to that transparent issue that everyone can see. Period. Do you see how we have officially come full circle? You want to transform a world from a powered and oppressive way of engaging to empowered ways of engaging. This is how you can start: transparency, responsibility, accountability. I like to give an adventure challenge for the upcoming week. And so, my adventure challenge to you is this: I want you to think about a situation in your own life. It might be a conflict, it might be something that needs a confrontation. But I want you to think about one issue in your life. And I want you to ask yourself, what is one thing that you could do to empower accountability? And if you're not there yet, if you're like, wow, Nina, I don't even know if I know exactly what the problem is yet, then guess what? I put a one pager attached in the notes just for you. TRA, start with transparency. What is the transparent issue for you that everyone would agree on? Period. Responsibility. What are your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that you can control because there's nobody else to do it for you? And when it comes to all of the other characters involved in this transparent situation, how do we invite accountability? How do we invite them to hold themselves responsible? Again, in an empowered world, without shaming, without minimizing, without misrepresenting, without outright rejecting. In an empowered world, I don't need to do those things. You're already going to be feeling enough. I don't need to do those things. What I do need is that transparency, responsibility, and accountability. If you are just tuning in, I invite you to go back and listen to our episodes on transparency and responsibility. We did cover a lot of ground in this particular episode. And of course, if you are wanting to explore this more, come to the Empowered Human Live today from 1 to 2, and or request the replay. If you go and RSVP to that, you can get that replay and you can check in and see what we talked about. If April's not the month for you to show up, come join us in May. It is the last Wednesday of every month, the Empowered Human Live. And if you're like, Nina, I'm busy that last Wednesday, then you know what you're going to do. You're going to DM me directly. Yes, at Drama Therapist Nina directly. And you're going to say, I want to get on the Empowered Human thread. How do I do that? And we will add you. Do not be alone in these conversations, friend. You don't have to be. The Empowered Human movement is here. It is time to start having these conversations about how we transform our world intentionally from powered to empowered. So, with that said, thank you for being willing to explore your triggers as a human being. And if this has been helpful, one of the best things you can do is share the episode with somebody else so they can get this dialogue going. Right? If you're afraid or you know somebody who's afraid to start having these conversations, this is how we do it. We start literally with step one. You just got to start, um, exploring material that allows you to step out of your comfort zone. And listening to this episode, y'all, it's not dangerous. It might be scary, but it's not dangerous. We got to know the difference between dangerous and scary if we want to step up and start creating the world that we intend to live in. So, I'm going to get off my box over here and I'm going to thank you for listening again, of course. And last but not least, I am inviting you to stay curious. Take care.